What would you do? I mean, really, what would you do? Imagine someone takes away 27 years of your life. Not just any years, but your best years, your youth, your prime, the time you were supposed to spend with your family watching your children grow up. They lock you in a tiny cell, force you to do hard labor, and try to break your spirit. They do all this because they disagree with you, because they fear you, because of the color of your skin. After all that, after nearly 3 decades of pain and loss, you are finally free. The world is watching. Your enemies are nervous. What do you do next? Do you seek revenge? Or do you choose something else entirely? This was not a hypothetical question for one man. It was the reality faced by Nelson Mandela. When he walked out of Victor Verster prison on the 11th of February 1990, he held the future of a nation in his hands. South Africa was a powder keg, ready to explode into a bloody civil war. Decades of racial oppression had created deep wounds of anger and hatred. Many people, both black and white, expected him to call for vengeance. They expected a reckoning. After all, he had every reason to be bitter. The apartheid regime had stolen his freedom, separated him from his wife and children, and brutalized his people. But Mandela chose a different path. He chose forgiveness. It's a choice that is almost impossible to comprehend. Forgiveness on that scale seems superhuman. How can a person endure so much suffering and not be consumed by a desire for retribution? For Mandela, it was not a sign of weakness or a surrender of principle. It was a strategic decision born from incredible wisdom and foresight. He understood that revenge would only lead to more violence and destruction. It would burn down the very country he had fought to liberate. He knew that the only way to build a new, unified South Africa was to heal the divisions of the past. And healing could only begin with forgiveness. This was not about forgetting, it was about choosing a future over a past. This decision to forgive his enemies is what turned Nelson Mandela from a political prisoner into a global icon of peace and reconciliation. It's a story that is more important today than ever before. In a world that often feels more divided and angry, Mandela's example shows us a different way forward. It teaches us that true strength is not found in how we fight our enemies, but in how we find the courage to work with them. His story is a powerful reminder that forgiveness is not just a personal act, it can be a political tool, a weapon for peace, and the foundation upon which a better world can be built. His life asks us all that same question. What will we choose? To understand the magnitude of Mandela's forgiveness, you first have to understand what he was fighting against. You have to understand apartheid. The word itself means apartness in Afrikaans, and that's exactly what it was. It was a system of government enforced by law designed to separate people based on race. Starting in 1948, the white minority government in South Africa created a society where your race determined every single aspect of your life. It was not just simple prejudice or bigotry, it was a cold, calculated and brutal system of oppression built into the very fabric of the country. It was legalized racism on an industrial scale. Under apartheid, every person was classified into a racial group, white, black, meaning African, colored, which is mixed race, or Indian. This classification dictated where you could live, what job you could have, and who you could marry. Black South Africans, who made up over 80% of the population, were treated as second-class citizens in the land of their birth. They were forced to live in designated areas called townships, often far from the cities where they worked. These townships, like Soweto, were overcrowded and lacked basic services like electricity, running water, or proper sanitation. It was a deliberate strategy to keep the black population poor and powerless. The laws were endless and suffocating. The pass laws required all black South Africans over the age of 16 to carry a pass book at all times. This book contained their photograph, fingerprints, and information about their employment and permission to be in certain areas. If you were caught without your passbook, you could be arrested and imprisoned immediately. This was a tool to control the movement of black people, to treat them like foreigners in their own country. Education was also segregated and unequal. The Bantu Education Act was explicitly designed to teach black children only the skills needed to serve the white minority. Imagine living in a world where you couldn't sit on the same bench as someone of a different skin color, where you couldn't go to the same hospitals, ride the same buses, or even use the same public toilets. Imagine being told that your dreams didn't matter, that your potential was limited by law, that your humanity was considered less than. This was the daily reality for millions of people. Apartheid was not just about separation, it was about humiliation. It was a system designed to strip away dignity, to crush hope, and to maintain white supremacy at any cost. This was the world Nelson Mandela was determined to change. Nelson Mandela was not born a revolutionary. He was born into a royal family in a small village, destined for a life as a counselor to his people. But when he moved to Johannesburg as a young man, he could not ignore the injustice he saw everywhere. The daily indignities of apartheid lit a fire within him. He joined the African National Congress, or ANC, a political party that had been peacefully protesting against racial discrimination for decades. For years, Mandela and his comrades believed in non-violent resistance. They organized boycotts, strikes, and acts of civil disobedience, hoping to persuade the government to change its ways through moral pressure and peaceful protest. However, the government responded not with negotiation, but with increasing violence. One of the turning points came on the 21st of March, 1960, in a township called Sharpeville. A crowd of unarmed protesters had gathered outside a police station to demonstrate against the hated pass laws. The police opened fire on the peaceful crowd, killing 69 people and injuring hundreds more. Most of them were shot in the back as they tried to flee. The Sharpeville massacre sent a shockwave through the country and the world. For Mandela and many others in the ANC, it was a brutal confirmation that peaceful protest was not working. The government was not listening. After Sharpeville, the government banned the ANC, making it an illegal organization. This forced Mandela and his fellow leaders to make a difficult and painful decision. If the government was going to use violence to maintain its power, they felt they had no choice but to respond. It was at this point that Mandela co-founded Umkhonto we Sizwe, which means Spear of the Nation. This was the armed wing of the ANC. The decision to embrace armed struggle was not taken lightly. Mandela was clear that they would target symbols of the apartheid state, power plants, transport links and government offices, not innocent people. It was a strategic shift from peaceful protest to armed resistance. This was a profound change for a man who had been inspired by the non-violent methods of Mahatma Gandhi. But Mandela saw it as a last resort. He argued that a government that uses force to crush the will of its people leaves them with no other option. He was not a man who loved violence. He was a man who loved freedom more. He was willing to risk everything, including his own life, to fight for a South Africa where all people were treated with dignity and respect. This decision set him on a collision course with the state, a path that would lead him from being a lawyer and a political leader to becoming South Africa's most wanted man. After the shift to armed resistance, Nelson Mandela had to go underground. He became a master of disguise, living in the shadows, constantly moving to avoid capture. He was known as the Black Pimpernel, a phantom figure who continued to organize the resistance against apartheid from secret locations. For 17 months, he eluded the police, becoming a symbol of defiance for the oppressed majority. However, in August 1962, his time on the run came to an end. An informant tipped off the police and Mandela was arrested. His initial sentence was for 5 years in prison for leaving the country illegally and inciting strikes. But, the state was not finished with him. While he was already in prison, the police raided a farm in Rivonia, a suburb of Johannesburg, which was being used as a secret headquarters for Umkhonto we Sizwe. They discovered documents that implicated Mandela and other ANC leaders in planning the armed struggle. This led to a new, more serious trial, the Rivonia trial. Mandela and his comrades were charged with sabotage, a crime that carried the death penalty. The world watched as these men were put on trial for their lives. The prosecution painted them as terrorists bent on destroying the country. The government was determined to make an example of them and crush the resistance for good. During the trial, Mandela was given the opportunity to speak. Instead of pleading for his life, he stood up in the dock and delivered one of the most powerful speeches of the 20th century. Known as the Speech from the Dock, it was a 4-hour indictment of the apartheid system and a defiant defense of the struggle for freedom. He did not deny the charges. Instead, he explained why he and the ANC had turned to armed resistance. He calmly detailed the decades of peaceful protest that had been met with violence and brutality. He explained that the move to sabotage was a last resort, taken to avoid a far more terrible civil war between races. He ended his speech with words that would echo around the world and become the defining statement of his life's mission. He said, "I have fought against white domination and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." After that speech, the judge had a choice. The world was calling for mercy. On 12th June 1964, the verdict was delivered. Instead of the death penalty, Mandela and his co-accused were sentenced to life in prison. Their new home would be a brutal, isolated prison, Robben Island. For the next 18 years, Nelson Mandela's world shrank to the size of a tiny cell on Robben Island. This was not just a prison, it was a place designed to break the human spirit. Located in the cold Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Cape Town, it was a maximum security facility for political prisoners. The conditions were harsh and dehumanizing. Mandela was confined to a damp cell measuring just 2 meters by 2 meters. He slept on a thin mat on the concrete floor. For years, he was only allowed one visitor and one letter every 6 months. The letters were heavily censored, with parts blacked out, and the visits were conducted through a thick glass partition. The days were filled with grueling physical labor. The prisoners were forced to work in a lime quarry, chipping away at rocks under the blazing sun. The bright glare from the limestone permanently damaged Mandela's eyesight. The guards were often brutal, and the food was poor. The system was designed to reinforce the racial hierarchy of the outside world. Colored and Indian prisoners received more food than black prisoners. The aim was simple: to make the prisoners forget who they were, to crush their hope, and to erase them from the memory of their people. But the apartheid regime underestimated the resilience of Mandela and his comrades. Instead of breaking them, Robben Island became a university. The prisoners refused to surrender their minds. They organized secret classes, teaching each other everything from literature and history to economics and politics. Mandela himself led discussions and encouraged every prisoner to study. They shared ideas, debated strategies, and kept the spirit of the struggle alive within the prison walls. They turned a place of punishment into a center of learning and resistance. It was on Robben Island that Mandela truly honed his leadership skills, his patience, and his remarkable self-discipline. He was preparing himself and his fellow prisoners for a future they still believed in. Crucially, it was also on Robben Island that Mandela began to study his enemies. He made a conscious effort to learn Afrikaans, the language of the oppressor. He read their literature and their history. He started conversations with the prison guards, many of whom were young, white Afrikaners who had been taught to see him as a monster, a terrorist. He treated them with respect, asking about their families and their lives. Slowly he began to see their humanity. He realized they were also products of a system, shaped by fear and propaganda. This was the beginning of his journey towards forgiveness. By understanding his jailers, he was laying the groundwork for understanding an entire nation. After 18 years on Robben Island, Mandela was transferred to Pollsmoor Prison and later to Victor Verster Prison. As the years passed, the world did not forget him. An international movement to free Nelson Mandela grew stronger and stronger. Concerts were held in his honor and sanctions were placed on South Africa's apartheid government. By the late 1980s, the regime was facing immense pressure from both inside and outside the country. The economy was collapsing, and the townships were in a constant state of rebellion. The government began to realize that it could not hold on to power forever. They knew they would have to negotiate, and they knew they would have to negotiate with Nelson Mandela. Secret talks began between Mandela and the government while he was still in prison. This was a delicate and dangerous process. Many in the ANC were suspicious of any deal with the regime, but Mandela, with his incredible foresight, knew that a negotiated settlement was the only way to avoid a catastrophic civil war. He engaged with his enemies, treating them as future partners rather than as foes. He was firm in his principles. He demanded the unbanning of the ANC and the release of all political prisoners. But he was also pragmatic. He was already practicing the politics of reconciliation before he had even been released. Finally, on 2nd February 1990, the new president, F.W. de Klerk, stood before Parliament and announced the unbanning of the ANC and other liberation movements. He also announced the unconditional release of Nelson Mandela. 9 days later, the world watched as a 71-year-old Mandela, looking dignified and calm, walked out of prison a free man. After 27 years, he was finally free. The country held its breath. In his first speech, delivered from the balcony of Cape Town's City Hall, he did not call for revenge. Instead, he called for reconciliation. He extended a hand of peace to the white minority, assuring them that they had a place in the new South Africa. This was Mandela's moment of truth. He could have chosen bitterness. He could have harnessed the anger of the black majority and unleashed it upon his former oppressors. No one would have blamed him, but he chose the more difficult path. He chose forgiveness. He immediately began working with President de Klerk, the very man who represented the system that had imprisoned him, to dismantle apartheid and build a new democracy. This partnership was fraught with tension and mistrust, but it held. Together, they navigated the country through 4 years of difficult negotiations, preventing a civil war and leading South Africa to its first ever democratic election. It was an act of political genius rooted in profound human grace. With the end of apartheid in sight, Nelson Mandela's acts of forgiveness became even more powerful and symbolic. He knew that to unite a country so deeply divided, he needed to do more than just sign treaties and write a new constitution. He needed to touch the hearts of the people. One of his most telling gestures came on the day of his inauguration as South Africa's first democratically elected president in 1994. Among the world leaders and dignitaries he invited as his special guests was Christo Brand, one of his former prison guards from Robben Island. By honoring a man who was once his jailer, Mandela sent a powerful message. The past would not define the future. Everyone had a role to play in the new Rainbow Nation. Perhaps his most famous act of reconciliation came a year later, during the 1995 Rugby World Cup, which was being hosted in South Africa. For decades, rugby had been a symbol of white Afrikaner nationalism and apartheid. The national team, the Springboks, was beloved by white South Africans but despised by the black majority. When the tournament began, many black South Africans cheered for any team playing against the Springboks. Mandela saw an opportunity. He understood that sport had the power to unite people in a way that politics never could. He threw his full support behind the team, encouraging all South Africans to get behind them. He famously met with the team's captain, Francois Pienaar, and built a relationship with him. On the day of the final, against the formidable New Zealand All Blacks, Mandela walked onto the pitch at Ellis Park Stadium in Johannesburg wearing a Springbok jersey with Pienaar's number 6 on the back. The crowd, which was almost entirely white, erupted in a chant of "Nelson, Nelson, Nelson." It was a moment that no one could have predicted. When South Africa won the match in a thrilling victory, Mandela presented the trophy to Pienaar. It was more than just a sporting victory. It was a moment of national catharsis. It was a symbol that the Rainbow Nation could truly work. Nelson Mandela taught the world that forgiveness is not about forgetting the past or pretending the pain did not happen. It is about refusing to let the past hold the future hostage. He understood that true freedom is not just about breaking your own chains, but about liberating your oppressor as well. His forgiveness saved South Africa from a devastating civil war and provided a blueprint for peace and reconciliation around the globe. His life stands as a testament to the idea that one person's capacity for grace can change the course of history. The question his story leaves for us is simple yet profound. What can we learn from his example in our own lives? If there's a historical figure or a contemporary personality you're curious about, drop their name in the comments. We'll dive into their life, exploring their achievements and